Yes, we might as well go ahead then. Luke, if you'd like to start the stream.
Yeah, the stream started, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone to the Family and Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Thursday, 17th of September, 10 a.m. and we are carrying it out virtually on a live stream. We'll move to item 1 on the agenda. Apologies for absence.
I've received apologies from Councillor Campbell, Councillor Watson and Julie Parkin, who is the union rep, but she has also advised that she will no longer be attending the meeting, so we will need to appoint a replacement for her.
Okay, thank you for that, and we'll make arrangements for that to take place. At this point, I'd just like to welcome our new Cabinet member, Guy Renner-Thompson, who was formerly the Chair of Family and Children's Services. Welcome him to this meeting. Also, Audrey Kingham, who's now the Service Director for Education and Skills, who's taken over from Dean Jackson. And I'd like to formally pass on our thanks to the former Cabinet member, Wayne Daly, and also to Dean Jackson, who we mentioned last time would be leaving his role. They've both carried out fantastic amount of work previously in their previous roles. Our thanks go to them, and we look forward to the same, if not more, being carried out by the new Cabinet member and new Service Director in their current role. So welcome to the meeting, and we look forward to your contribution. And please feel free to jump in with anything you can at this meeting. So we'll move on to item 2, the minutes of the last meeting. If you'd care to go through those minutes, and please feel free to jump in with any items of correction for those minutes. They have all been already been presented at full council. Does anyone have anything that they would like to raise from those minutes, please? Can we take those as a true record of the meeting on the 16th? Yes,
Jack, can I raise a couple of points? And I mean,
yes.
You might want to say, no, you can't, as I start off, but I will anyway, and we'll see how far we get. So in terms of the minutes, obviously, there's a number of paragraphs that relate to the Chief Executive's report, which provided the committee with confidence cross-party, and the committee was satisfied with the position at that time. I obviously raised a number of things around the executive board, their communications, and the executive member at that time, communicating with opposition members and keeping them in the loop. I'm obviously deeply concerned about the changes that have happened. Not necessarily you, Councillor Renner, because we haven't had the opportunity to work together yet, but I'm deeply concerned at the other changes, significantly large changes that have happened since this committee last met. And I just want to note that, in those minutes, a clear example of leadership and communication, which I'm now not so confident about. And I need to note that because I was so praising of the previous situation. I'm not so confident at the moment, and I just want that noted.
Okay, that can be noted. Anything else in those minutes? Okay, can we move as a true record? Agreed. Russ? Russ, did you have your hand up? Oh, were you agreeing to the minutes? Yep, thank you. So item 3, disclosure of members' interests. Do you have any disclosures? No, thank you. So item 4, plan of key decisions. Do we have anything to raise on there? Chris?
No, it's just for info at the moment. Yeah.
No changes. Thank you. So item 5, the report of the Director of Public Health, which is a verbal report. I'm going to pass you over to Jim Brown to deliver this verbal report. Thanks.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Can I just double check that everyone can hear me okay and the volume is appropriate? I'm not sure you'll get a. I'm a little way away, but not too far. Whether you'll get a good sight of us for YouTube. But I'm Jim Brown, a consultant public health, standing in for Liz Morgan, the Director of Public Health. What I'm going to just try and do is just give you a brief kind of update on some of the figures in the county and for schools. And really just try to focus this on, I think, what's most relevant to the members of this committee. It's obviously been an extremely busy 2 weeks for schools, for ourselves, as we're supporting the local contact tracing after Public Health England experienced they had more calls in one day from schools alone than they normally have in the whole of September. So they are certainly, as with everyone, I think, in the system, feeling the pressure. And so for the past 2 weeks, we've been taking over some of the local contact tracing for all single cases or positive cases of COVID within schools, and obviously taking a large number of queries. So just to give you an update on the county rates, the current rate 4th to the 10th of September is always a bit delayed because the timing on when we get informed about results tends to be a little bit of a lag. Sometimes it's very quick, sometimes slower, but it's at 25 per 100,000. This is increasing, has been increasing over recent weeks, less quickly than some other areas of Tyneside, but certainly increasing. We've seen the majority of cases in southeast Northumberland, but I think what we're seeing is them sort of beginning to spread north and west. So we are certainly at a crossroads. I think what's really important here is that we know for a fact that we're only detecting a proportion of cases. The average age of cases that we do know about is increasing, but also I think with some of the testing difficulties, and I know all of our inboxes have been busy with a lot of concerned parents and other residents within the county about access to testing. That actually, if people are not managing to access testing in a timely way, also we may be underestimating the number of cases. So I think you'll be aware in this committee that there is a local outbreak control plan, and there is a subgroup led by David Street on educational settings, which meets on a regular basis. I know they've been doing an awful lot of work over the summer to support and prepare schools for the return a couple of weeks ago. I think there's been an awful lot of work, but there's nothing like the kind of reality of lots of kids with coughs and colds and other symptoms to squeeze the system and make it difficult, I think, for schools. We've had to date 21 positive cases in 18 schools, with a mix of around a third of these have been staff, 2/3 have been pupils. I think there's been quite a lot of questions from head teachers about should they be isolating classes if they have a child with symptoms. Of course, just for the benefit of everyone, the symptoms of COVID, which prompt isolation, being fever, temperature above 37.8, new persistent cough, or loss of or change to normal sense of taste or smell. Sorry to reiterate it. I'm just making a point to reiterate everywhere I go. I hope you don't mind. But I think a lot of head teachers said, well, shouldn't we be isolating sooner than they get the positive test result? So we've done an analysis of all of the queries, and we've received a large number of queries via a web form, which the head teachers are completing. And it's only a small proportion of those where they've submitted that pupils or staff have symptoms where they've subsequently tested negative. Now, we're still waiting some of those results, but just to give you an idea, 156 negative tests, 19 positive, 122 pending. So that's actually, 12% of the ones we know about that are positive. And I think that reinforces that if we were to close bubbles or isolate people on the basis of the symptoms alone, I think it would have an extremely damaging impact on education. And I hope you'd agree with that. But of course, we'll need to be monitoring the situation really carefully. We certainly escalate up where we've had more than one case up to Public Health England, and where there's schools that have multiple numerous pupils or students or teachers with symptoms. There is a schools helpline that's coming on. We're a bit uncertain whether that'll add value, because obviously sometimes it's really helpful to have more of a local approach to these, and I think that's been proved to be helpful. But we are really very conscious, both in our team and David Street's team, about our capacity to support the contact tracing and dealing with queries going forward, and really would be seeking obviously additional support via this LA7 proposed measures, that we get additional support for local contact tracing. So I was probably going to end it there for now. I'm sure there's lots of questions from the committee, but Chair, I'll hand back over to you if there are questions. Happy to take them.
Thank you for that, Jim. Quite a lot of information there, and I know that there's a great deal of queries and questions out in the public at present, and it is an ever-changing situation. But for this committee, I'd just like to ask if anyone has any questions that they would like to raise. Yes, Scott.
A couple of questions, Chair. So obviously, without stating the obvious, that it appears that a lot of this should have been in place prior to schools opening, or, you know, a far larger ability to test when schools were reopened. I've had a number of cases, as I'm sure members have, and school representatives will have had on the call, where staff and children who have been advised to be tested can't get one, or have to travel 120, 130 miles to get one. Some of my constituents have been offered them in Scotland rather than England as the closest opportunity. So from your point of view, Jim, are you saying, and are we saying as a council, that the new measures that are being put in place through the new sites in Ashington and Blythe, the mobile sites that are going around Berwick, Alnwick, Morpeth, etc., will be sufficient to ensure that those that need them, and it's difficult because I appreciate demand, we're not sure what the demand will be, but if people are sensible and the people who need testing go to get a test, are we saying that we think this new capacity will be able to deal with that and eradicate the problem of my constituents and many others being offered tests that they simply can't get to, and are absolutely terrified because they don't know whether their child's poorly with a general cough or cold, they don't know whether they're poorly with a coronavirus, they don't know whether they should be self-isolating or going back to work, they don't know a lot of things. And I think when people don't know a lot of things, it creates a lot of anxiety. And I just wonder whether these new measures will help with that, and we're confident that they will. And my other concern is, obviously previously, and I don't want to keep harking back, but I have to in the context of the discussion, we had links in nationally in terms of our chief executive was part of the national advisory group for the corona response, etc., etc. Are we confident that we're still getting Northumberland's voice heard in that arena? And I appreciate we've joined the LA7 to make sure our voice is heard, and obviously, you know, collective voice is power. But are we confident that we're still getting the information and the plug-in that we previously had? Thanks, Chair.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Scott. Those, I mean, I think there's a few questions there, you know, sort of, I suppose, concerning testing, but also whether Northumberland's voice is heard. I think with testing, it is a huge challenge. And I think certainly what we'll see with the 2 local testing sites, which I understand are being built over the weekend, I think the exact arrangements for that are still yet to be absolutely finalized in terms of how people access those. So I don't want to kind of make any announcements in terms of until we're absolutely certain, you know, what the exact capacity will be. I certainly think it will help, and I certainly think that it demonstrates in many ways that Northumberland's voice has been heard. I mean, I think certainly some interventions to just bring this forward and really push from our local leaders has, I think, brought this forward in a way that we wouldn't have seen had we not seen a lot of push from people right across the system to bring these. And I think that, you know, we've certainly welcome the speed in which it's been they're going to be built over the weekend. I think, will they solve the issue? I think remains to be seen. I think we escalate all our issues back up to the test and trace. I think they absolutely recognize these issues that are going on around people being sent to you know, far off parts of the country over the last week or two. I think they have had utterly unprecedented demand for tests. I understand they have said that if you go on and you get told Galashiels, just log off and just try again just a short time later, and you may well get something a lot more local. That's the advice that they've given. I have to be honest, I haven't yet tried it. I keep meaning to have a proper good old go at it. I know others have, but it is a hard. I know it's really stressful when you want a really quick result, and particularly, you know, when you're worried about family members. I mean, I would reiterate, just, you know, testing isn't all the answer. The answer to this is isolation and social distancing. So if people have those symptoms that I mentioned earlier, the fever, temperature, loss of taste or smell, or change to it, or new persistent cough, that they do isolate for 10 days and the rest of the household isolates for 14 days, and that they do request a test. You know, and all of those social distancing measures that we, you know, and other measures that we've talked about, you know, for a long time now. The testing, I think, just simply enables, I think, people to, if they've got symptoms and unsure, to be able to get back to their normal things and come out of isolation if they need to. It's really important, and it enables contact tracing, as we've been doing in the schools. And I think that, you know, it certainly has a huge role, but I think we don't want to forget it's not just about testing. Testing is really important, but isolation is the actual control measure.
Thanks, Jim. Can I just quickly clarify one thing, Chair, if I may?
Yep.
It was just, so these have been announced as coming online at the weekend, but we don't know what the capacity is. So
they're being built, I understand, over the weekend. But we don't have any.
I've just read a government thing where it says they're available at the weekend, but we don't know what the capacity is yet.
Yeah, I don't want to. Well, I think it's, you know, as we keep finding, I think the situation changes so rapidly about what this will look like, whether there will be bookings or whether it will be booking only. That I'm really reluctant to try to pin down exactly what the numbers will be. I think we're really going to push to try to make sure that as much as possible, this is going to be for local Northumberland residents, you know, where we can. But obviously, we are not in control of this. You know, we only put in the ask, and it is certainly about us just really reiterating, and I'd welcome, obviously, you know, all political support, just to reiterate that, you know, this is such an important issue, and we really would, you know, like as much for Northumberland residents as we can, because what we don't want to see is just building them and having people come, you know, from other areas, you know, long distance to travel into Blyth and Ashington for those tests. But inevitably, everyone's got to put in, you know, together on this. It's a national emergency, and we've all got to, you know, sort of support the rest of the system in this.
Guy, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just the point made about getting Northumberland's voice heard and changes in exec leadership team. From my position, a bit more behind the scenes, you know, I can say I've got absolute faith in Kelly Angus, you know, our own Kath McAvoy-Carr. They're doing a really, really fantastic job, especially in a very difficult situation, in making sure that our voice is heard, and Liz Morgan and Jim and everyone. I mean, Kath is supposed to be on leave right now. And she's here with us, making sure that these things are going forward. So I have every confidence in the leadership team.
Thank you, Gavin. Gordon, did you want to add something as well, please?
Yeah, I don't mind. It has been mentioned about South East Northumberland having these units possibly in place by this weekend, as Scotty mentioned there. Is there a demand? Is there a need for others in the county? We've got a really sparse area, but particularly if I mention that the western Northumberland, Prudhoe is touching Gateshead. We know the unfortunate figures we've got on Gateshead there. Haltwhistle, we've got the arterial route coming through the A69, A68 as well there. There was something at Hexham at one time that's now gone. What's the thoughts behind not having the one out the west? We've got 3 very large towns out west.
So there are 2 sort of testing system designed, the local testing sites, which originally were identified to be for more urban areas where they allowed people who maybe don't own cars to be able to walk in. Now, that I'm not certain that's what's going to happen with the local testing sites, but that was the original idea behind them. In terms of actually whether it's just walk-ins will be permitted or not. We have a long list of mobile testing unit sites as well. So that's the other form. Those are the slightly more temporary. The local testing sites are sort of more winterized, where people can turn up, not in a car. So that particularly for the more the areas of more dense population, we have a large number. And actually, part of I think going in with the LA7 is that we can pull in more resources for mobile testing sites right across the county and right across those 7 local authorities. So that is in progress, and we hope to see all of our sort of market towns covered in that way, and hopefully those mobile testing units will be drive through. Now, from what I understand, Hexham is still functioning, but there are issues about whether they reach a certain kind of capacity, and that's around the availability of reagents or availability of tests. And they are on a kind of rotating basis with the current mobile testing units at Berwick and Alnwick. I would just, for anyone watching, just say, actually, please don't turn up at these mobile testing units. They are appointment only. So please don't come from far and wide. Please don't come from Scotland or Cumbria to these mobile testing sites unless you have an appointment.
That's fine. Thank you, Chair. Can I just on that, would you mind just keeping in mind Western Northumberland? It's extremely rural, but there's some huge areas there as well. I'm aware of an incident which was mentioned in the local press over the weekend about a reporter's relative who had extreme difficulties in getting a test done there. I know Scott picked up on that as well. That's absolutely fine. Have we got the publicity right as well? Are we going to get the publicity right? Social media is obviously massive out there. Can we up that game a little bit so people actually understand what they're supposed to do? There's the national one, but if we're going more local, that's what Mr. Hancock's going to say at 11 o'clock today. Have we got it right for people in Northumberland to get the message out there?
Mark, I can probably answer that.
Yes, please, Kath.
So Anne Bridges and her team are working almost 24/7 currently to ensure that the messages that are going out are the correct ones. The difficulty we have is that we can't stop what's reported on social media, whether or not that's the right facts or the wrong facts. So Anne and her team are working, I want to say tirelessly, but that doesn't seem to give justice to the amount of work that they're doing to try and ensure that the messages that go out are clear and consistent, and that people will understand what is being asked of them. So it's an ongoing process, and we will continue to do so once the restrictions have been announced, that there are press releases ready to go.
Thank you, Kath. Is that okay for you there, Gordon? Great, thank you. Russ, did you have a question, please?
Yeah, just to follow on from Scott's point, I was speaking to 2 head teacher colleagues yesterday. They have staff who have been tested, but they're sitting at home now for a week waiting for the results of their test. So they've got staff who may well be fine and able to work, but until they get a result from the test, they're sitting at home. And that clearly impacts on the ability of schools to deliver quality of education. So what, if anything, can we do to hurry up the result process as well as the availability?
I'm afraid all that we in Northumberland can do is just escalate that back up and keep doing that. I think both for us directly through through Test and Trace and potentially you as politicians via your channels as well. I think I'm not here to sort of defend national government, but you know, it is an unprecedented huge number of tests that they're trying to achieve. They are bringing on, I know, additional laboratory sites. So I think all we can do is escalate that back up as, you know, numerous incidents. I don't think that we're not in a position to chase those individual tests, I'm afraid.
I think one of the important points is to make sure that people are just going for tests when they are showing symptoms and not, you know, checking to see that they don't have it, because yes, they might not have it today. That's not to say that they may not contract it tomorrow or the day after. There does seem to be an unprecedented demand on testing. I have family who have contracted it and tested positive. We were informed through the track and trace we had to isolate, and their test results were returned in 72 hours. And this was a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, we're aware that that period has extended now, but the number of positive tests that are coming back is not in line with the number of tests that's being completed. And it leads you to believe that there are tests being carried out on people who may not be showing symptoms. So the message is that tests should only be, you know, be carried out and being requested on people who are showing the symptoms and not clogging up the system. It's very important that that's the process that should be followed. Does anyone else have a question? So as part of this, there's a health and wellbeing presentation being carried out on Monday. And Chris will happily share the link for that stream to anyone who would like that, because that will go into more detail. That's being carried out on Monday morning. So if anyone would like it, or Chris, if you would just like to forward the link anyway to committee members, then they can tune into that stream and see more information with regards to this. Okay. Right then, we'll move on to item 6, which is the Complaints Annual Report 1920. Now, this is a slightly delayed report. It should have come out earlier in the year. Thank you, Jim. Should have come out earlier in the year. Now, specific for this committee is really only the second part of the report, which starts on page, well, I'll say 32, 36. I know there's dual numbering on the report. But I'm going to pass this over to James Hillary for him to deliver the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm covering for my colleague Karen Willis, who's the Children's Social Care Complaints Manager, who has timed her leave immaculately. I will endeavour to provide as much detail as I can, but there's a possibility that I might need to go back to Karen when she returns from leave and come back to committee with a written response if needed. But I shall, as I said, endeavour to do my best. The report itself is fairly self-explanatory. It's the statutory complaints process for adult services and for children's social care. And so if I just focus on the children's elements as a starting point, that will probably be best. So excuse me while I just toggle through. Now, in children's services, as Karen's pointed out, there's the requirement for an annual report, which she's noted in point 1.1, and she's also given a brief overview about the different ways in which young people and families can complain. In terms of the numbers of complaints received, they are more or less the same as they were in the last financial year. And as she has pointed out, we don't get many complaints at all from young people themselves. The bulk of complaints come from adults, as she says, on behalf of a child or a young person. However, I would stress that children are able to raise concerns, particularly those children who are looked after, and it does mention a few some data that we've collected from the care homes that we run. In terms of the children's process, as you're probably aware, it's got 3 stages to it, and those are, as I said, are set down in the regulations. And so in terms of stage 1, which is, if you like, a local resolution, which is often focused on the local team manager, we have 50 complaints received, of which a number were not progressed. But of those complaints, we have 17 partially upheld, 7 fully upheld, and a number 16 not upheld. And then a number then progressed to stage 2, where the complainant remains unhappy about some or potentially all of the complaint that as it's been dealt with locally. And as it says on page 34, we've had 3 complaints escalated to stage 2. Now, stage 2 is a slightly more longer process involving an independently sourced investigating officer and independent person, who then frame the complaint with the complainant and investigate. And as we see, the 3rd stage is an independent panel again, that's sourced, and they would consider the complaint and how it's been handled, and obviously a little bit of the detail as well, and come to findings as well. And as it says here, we've only had 1 escalated to stage 3 over this financial year 1920. There is a point that Karen does make at point 2.15, is the difficulties that we've experienced trying to set up the panels for stage 3, just due to the number of COVID restrictions. So what we'll see in this year is we'll probably see an increase in the number of review panels, because we've only now got to a point where we can set them up and run them. Interestingly, just for information, the local government and social care ombudsman did change the regulations temporarily to allow, if you like, the suspension of things like review panels until such time as it was safe to pursue them. Page 35 just has references to stage 2, which, as I've mentioned before. And then the final stage of the complaints process is the local government ombudsman. Karen's provided a little bit of detail in terms of numbers about from a number of other local authorities, just to give you an idea of how other people fare with the local government ombudsman. And as I said, Karen has made has given a link to the ombudsman's website. I think it's worth noting that they put all their outcomes on the website, both the ones they uphold, and also the ones they don't uphold. Section 4 is an overview of the types of area that people complain about. As you can see from the table on page 37, it's the standard of service is definitely one of the more important areas for us to focus on. And as Karen has said here, standard of service has been the biggest categorization, includes complaints where there may be several issues being considered, and they cannot all be categorized individually. So in some respects, we do use it as a bit of a catch-all bucket. I think the most important section, I think, is probably the next one, which is lessons learned, because there's definitely a significant focus that the team and also the service areas have on learning. And I think the key thing is to, I suppose the phrase might be square the circle, to make sure that whatever issues that come out of complaints, whether they're learning on an individual basis or a more systemic basis, are embedded in practice both by the individual and also the wider service area. I'm aware that there is a senior manager who has a sort of a quality assurance role, shall we say, and I think part of their role is to link in with care and vice versa to make sure that whatever comes out of complaints gets shared across where applicable to the different service areas and different teams, to make sure that we try not to do the same thing wrong twice. I think the other thing is to say that time frames for children's complaints are very clearly laid out, and they seem to be improving. I mean, there's still a lot of work to do, but I think that standard is being met more. And I don't think that from this particular report, or from my knowledge of children's social care complaints, that there's been any particular area or any particular team that's been particularly highlighted over this 12 months. Because I am confident that if there was that, then we would definitely make reference to that. I suppose I've probably done enough talking. So if there's anybody with any questions or any.
You wanted to unmute a little bit at the end there, James, but just thank you for the report. It is extremely detailed, and rightly so, going into specific anonymised examples, but it does show the transparency that we have with this. I'm really pleased to see that. Do any members have any questions that they would like to ask with regards to this report? Scott, first up.
Why don't you get faster at pressing that button? The anticipation's too much. In terms of the low level of children's complaints themselves, do we feel confident that children feel confident to make complaints where they're relevant? Because actually, we're talking about children who are living in a corporate establishment, often feels like they're home, and it's very difficult for them to raise concerns about things that they're unhappy with. I mean, as a corporate parent, I have visited a number of homes, and let me tell you, verbally, they're quite happy to tell you all their complaints, and I quite enjoy them, and, you know, pass them on. But from that point of view of a child sitting in a room that is their bedroom in a corporate facility that is their home, do we feel confident that they are empowered enough to make complaints, would be the first question. And I would like to know just a little bit more, if I may, Chair, about the Mind of My Own app, in terms of, is that a confidential facility? Do all children that are living in care with us have access to it? Do all children get given it regardless? Does everybody have a phone? Are they all able to access it? You know, that type of thing. And then thirdly, there must be cases, which I would have expected to see in here, of whistleblowing between staff members. So there must be times when staff don't feel comfortable with the behaviour of other staff in some of our establishments, and that must be incorporated somewhere in this document, which I can't find, that tells us how much of a true picture is provided between staff who aren't comfortable with other staff's practice, or issues that have arisen during a period of time where a member of staff's used the whistleblowing policy. And then the other question would be, is it just then therefore the council's overall whistleblowing policy, or do we have a separate one for instances that relate to children's social care because of its sensitive nature and other things? And of course, a lot of it can be around perception of other people's behaviors and things like that around its appropriateness. But I suppose just for some reassurance, especially in the current climate around whistleblowing, what that entails, because it's not mentioned anywhere.
Mark, I'm quite happy to answer those questions, because because it's probably more appropriate for me to do so. So in relation to children's complaints, Scott, we, as you absolutely recognise, most of our young people are very well able to raise issues, and they do so via their social workers and their independent review officers, and we capture those in a slightly different way, because those are things that we can answer and deal with straight away. So if a child raises an issue about, I'm not seeing my mum, or I'm not seeing, you know, I haven't seen, you know, I haven't got the latest pair of trainers, we would deal with those at a much lower level than necessarily our client relations team would get involved in. If they relate to a children's home, and if you look on page 33, 37, there are a number of, there's a table there which identifies where we have had more complaints escalate to our client relations team. The issues within Kylo House, which shows 24 allegations or 24 complaints that have been raised, they relate not just to our own children, but to those children who are placed on a national level. So, and they have a high turnover of children and young people who are in secure accommodation. We do get a high level of issues raised from them on a more formal basis rather than the informal stuff, because they aren't always seeing their social workers in the same way as they do when they're living very locally. So does that answer your question about complaints from children? We do encourage them. We do ask them all of the time to.
Just around the app, is that a confidential thing?
Well, the Momo app it's confidential, yes. So, and it depends on who the Momo request it has come from. So, IROs, independent review officers, have a way of asking children their views via the Momo app. Our youth service use it. Our children and care council use it, and all children who are in our looked after system have access to that in one way or another, whether that be via a tablet, or whether that be via their phone, or whether that be via their computer. We also do encourage children to talk to their carers, or talk to their social workers, or talk to their advocate if they have one, in order to raise issues should they need to do so. Okay, then in relation to the whistleblowing issues and the staff practice concerns, there's two different aspects of that really. If it's an issue around a safeguarding concern and it relates to somebody's care of a child or a young person, then that would go via our local authority designated officer, who deals with all allegations against children and young people. Deals with all allegations where it's a member of the children's workforce and a child or any other member of staff is raising a concern about their practice. So that would go via our LADO initially in order to determine what action needed to be taken. And as a result of that, our LADO has a separate report that gets presented on an annual basis in relation to the numbers of allegations that are made. And we also have our own internal council whistleblowing service that we record those separately on, but wouldn't necessarily go to to our client relations team because of the confidential nature of those, and they would be dealt with via HR processes.
That's fine. It's just for completeness. I just wondered what the process was around that.
Yeah.
Is that everything, Scott?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gordon, you indicated?
Yeah, thank you, Kath, for spending some of your holiday with us today. Can I also ask about the Cumbria, the Northumberland Tenware NHS Trust? Hopefully they'll change the name to something shorter later on. Anything there? Is this within that report?
No, no.
Okay.
It doesn't cover CNTW. It only covers children's social care complaints.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions? James?
Yeah, I'd just pick up on the point about the CNTW. CNTW will produce its own annual report as well for complaints, which you'd probably need to contact them about. I'm not sure where they would ordinarily publicise it, but they would certainly do one themselves.
Fine, thank you.
Okay. Obviously, it would be, great if we didn't receive any complaints, but it could then draw a question as to why we didn't receive any complaints. Could it be that we didn't have the correct structure in place and correct reporting facilities, or people were perhaps too scared to put a complaint in? This does show that we do have a reporting facility in place and structure so people can report it, and it also shows that we're addressing these concerns and putting measures in place for improvement. So whilst it's not the best to see that people are complaining, at least it shows that we are addressing these concerns and responding to them for improvement. Item or part 6 to the report shows how you can obtain further information through the complaints manager and children's services, and if any members do wish to obtain any further information, please use those resources to follow that through. And I'm sure they'll be happy to provide that information. Okay, thank you, James, for the report. And with that, we'll move on to item 6.2, which is the pupil premium update. I'll pass that on to David Street to provide that report, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is David Street. I'm the Acting Deputy Director of Education at the moment, but I've been involved in school improvement in Northumberland for the last 5 years. I've been the author of this particular report. I plan to just run through a few of the key points across the report, and then obviously accept any questions on any specifics you've got. The report is split into two broad sections, really, financial aspects to the pupil premium, and then an outcomes section as well. Both those sections could have been 50-page documents, to be fair. There is a lot of depth and detail which we could go into. I'm just hoping that the report itself is a reasonable overview for you. The headlines really around the pupil premium is across Northumberland, roughly 1 in 4 pupils are in receipt of the pupil premium, in that their school receives some additional funding to support them with the educational provision. 1 in 4 is about 10,000 pupils, and most of those, because there are a variety of different reasons as to why you might receive the pupil premium, the vast majority is that the children have been in receipt of free school meals, either currently or at any point in the last 6 years. That's the biggest group. But there's also a pupil premium for looked after children, and also a small one for service children. But on the whole, most of the pupils in receipt of it receive either £955 if they're a secondary age child, or £1,345 if they're in a primary setting. In terms of the way it breaks down geographically and sort of the figures that we're talking about, 57 of our schools get either between £0 and £25,000 in addition to the usual funding. 34 schools get between £25,000 and £50,000. 33 of the schools get between £50,000 and £100,000, and there's 37 schools that actually get higher than £100,000 per year. The most of those are in the southeast corner of Northumberland, and obviously on the whole it is the larger schools that receive a higher proportion of funding, but you know, though the average is 1 in 4 children at some of our schools, it's half of the children in the school will be in receipt of the pupil premium, depending on the social deprivation, I suppose, in the area that the school is based. In terms of the outcomes, really for this group of children, and compared to non-pupil premium children, both locally and nationally, I've got a selection of graphs in the report and a little bit of text. I've really picked out some key academic outcomes, and actually there is a consideration to think about other outcomes. You know, it could be that there's a number of these children might have special educational needs, and so, to be honest, the key outcomes I'm bringing up here, they're academic outcomes, might not necessarily be a true indication of how successful every child has been. So in some individual cases, there will be successes that are not recorded here, is basically what I'm saying. And if you've got questions around that, I can try and help a little bit later on. But in terms of these key academic outcomes, I've just picked a measure at the end of the key stages, which I think is sort of comparable across. So for early years, we're looking at a good level of development, and then through to key stage 1, key stage 2, and at key stage 4, we're looking at success in English and maths, really, just to try and have a broad summary there. Overall, for the pupil premium group, the actual performance in Northumberland is generally lower than their peers nationally. So our pupil premium group do perform slightly lower in all the key stages, except early years. Actually, in early years, pupil premium children in Northumberland do better than their peers nationally. At the same time, our non-pupil premium children and pupils across Northumberland actually all do, on average, slightly better than the non-pupil premium peers nationally. So our pupil premium are doing a little bit worse and our non-pupil premium are doing a little bit better. So as a result, the gap between those two groups is higher than the national in all areas, except for the last year where we collected these particular figures in early years, like I say, which is showing a little bit of a turnaround in the outcomes there. You know, nationally throughout this program, the pupil premium program, the gaps between pupil premium and non-pupil premium are not shrinking. So nationally, that is the picture. And in Northumberland, we replicate that picture. We are not massively closing on these gaps, and I think we would all probably recognise that underperformance in this area. It's the performance is too low, and it remains expressly unfair that somebody in a class is less likely to do well than the person sitting next to them, mainly due to the fact that one's parents have a higher income level than the child next door. So we know that's clearly not acceptable. At the same time, there are many successful pupil premium children or children in receipt of the pupil premium in Northumberland. It's just not all of them. So there are successes in the area, and there's a demonstration there that schools are being successful in this area with some, but not all, of the children that we're talking about here. The development area to go forwards, I suppose, is to obviously ensure that all and that disadvantages does not have an impact on academic outcomes. It is a bit of a golden chalice that we're all seeking, and as I say, nationally it is being sought as well. The suggestions really in the summary of the report, the recommendations are that the drive to improve the outcomes for disadvantaged students is refreshed, and that could be refreshed via a Northumberland strategy purely, or possibly there's definitely opportunities for a North of Tyne pupil premium strategy, where we could work with our North Tyneside colleagues and Newcastle colleagues in order to focus on this group in particular, because as I say, it is an issue across the local authorities mentioned. Though I think that disadvantaged students and residents generally actually across Northumberland are given a high priority in council service plans, I think maybe there's a possibility to be more specific and maybe cut out generalizations of what we'd wish to do and replace that with some real key focus on what we specifically can do and must do in certain areas with certain schools and young people. I think that there is some best practice in Northumberland, and we've taken some steps to promote that across all educational settings, but I think there's an opportunity to do that on a more consistent basis. And I also think that the governance of pupil premium in particular could be increased, and the shortly to be formed Northumberland Education Strategy Board, I think, should play a key role in that. I'm confident that the Northumberland Education Strategy Board will have disadvantaged pupil premium youngsters absolutely front and centre in the work that they do, and in championing that group, we'll be able to allocate additional resources and share that best practice, so we can, as I say, we shadow nationally the national picture, but actually, we need to make sure that the GCSE results for disadvantaged young people are at least as good as their peers around them, and if it's not, we need to do more work to get to that position. It's a very brief summary of quite a complex area, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, David. Guy, did you want to come in on the back of that one?
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, this report is one that Scrutiny requested, and it's probably one of the better reports that Scrutiny's requested. For me, what this says is, although outcomes are getting better for looked after children, they're not getting better quick enough. And we are going to be an authority that doesn't just bury our head in the sand and say, well, things are bobbling along and are getting better. We're going to really, really push for these children to make sure they have the best outcome in life. And that is something I'm very proud of, and I think we should all be proud of that as a local authority, that we're doing that, because there are other parts of the country where that certainly won't be the case. So I would commend the report to scrutiny and ask that you approve the 4 recommendations on the front as our plan to really drive outcomes for these children.
Thank you, Guy. Yes, the recommendations are, as I say, to drive to improve the outcomes for disadvantaged students. Outcomes for disadvantaged students given a higher priority in all council service plans. Best practice in Northumberland beyond is highlighted and promoted across all educational settings, and governance of this area is increased via the Northumberland Education Strategy Board. Just before I move to questions, I recall being a former governor of a school which had a low pupil premium. It was a repeated question to basically say, how do we spend this money to produce the change? And there was no simple answer. It was a very low income from the pupil premium, and the question probably came up at every meeting to say, what can we do to relate that income into something that will have a positive impact? And I will hazard a guess that is a question that comes up at every or many governors' meetings in schools time and time again now. If there's something that the authority can put in place, or an education strategy board that will help to support that and produce those positive results, then I think that's something that we really should be supporting. Any questions from members of the committee? Yes, Alan. You had your hand up first. Alan Hodgson, you take yourself off mute.
Okay. Sorry, I was tapping the wrong button there. Sorry, yeah. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for the report. You did allude to examples. You mentioned that there were examples of best practice in schools in narrowing the gap in secondary and primary. I mean, have we got many examples of best practice? But also as well, the other point is that the Sutton Trust did a very, very in-depth analysis years and years ago on the actual spending of pupil premium. And what they found was the vast majority of the money was spent on TAs. And in the analysis there, they found that that was not what was value for money and making the greatest impact. Have we as an authority done that analysis and seen how the actual spending is making an impact?
Yeah, in terms of the best practice part of the question, we have had and continue to have strategy groups and working groups specifically for pupil premium on a termly basis, and at those, we've got sort of meeting after meeting where different schools who've shown some specific progress with specific groups for specific reasons have come in and presented, so basically shared their best practice across those groups. And those meetings and the findings and the resources and so on are then shared on the e-courier for all schools. I think there is impact that we can make. I think that there is best practice which could be shared further across all schools. I think there is a trick or a challenge for us to ensure that each of the schools are picking up that best practice. With relate to the report that you were just speaking about, there's been more
about the best practice. For example, you've identified schools that are really probably the gap is widening. Okay. Are you pairing schools up with the schools that have consistently closed the gap?
And as I say, that the network meetings has been the model that we've used and has been the tool we've used to link those types of schools together. There's the head teachers where possibly gaps are growing, where what they would say, I'm not particularly saying that that's the excuses for them, but one of the aspects that they would mention is the fact that through the sort of austerity years where the central block of funding for schools has in real terms gone down, when some also while costs have gone up. In terms of that, some head teachers might suggest that the pupil premium funding they receive has filled a gap in their core funding, and therefore there's a challenge for them to do much above and beyond specifically for those children. In terms of a link to some of the research you're talking about, the EEF have done a significant amount of research in and around the pupil premium, and actually their core focus is to focus on research that will support disadvantaged children. And the finding of the vast majority of their reports and their sort of mega reports where they look at multiple reports from the past and put them together, the findings are that actually the core impact on the pupil premium group is high quality teaching, not necessarily individual additional things placed in. So actually the head teachers who are saying, I'm using, unfortunately, they might say to me privately, unfortunately, I'm using some or all of the additional funding I'm getting to plug gaps in my mainstream offer. What I'll be repeating back to them is, well, that's brilliant then, actually, because it is your mainstream offer that is going to actually make the difference. And those schools that are making the successes, yes, there are schemes, and yes, there are schemes of work and different strategies that they're using. But one of the things we have found in Northumberland is that when we apply some of the strategies that particularly support disadvantaged children, one of the things is it's often high quality teaching, which goes on to support every other child in the class as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that helps close the gap, because obviously the higher performing children also get better. But actually, you know, aside from the gap, actually the core outcomes for those young will go up and needs to continue to do so. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Gordon, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a governor of a school with very low pupil premium, also governor another school with very high. The latter has close links with a private school, which is excellent, very innovative. The new world we're coming into, we're going to see a lot of people, unfortunately, will be for the very first time eligible for pupil premium or something along those lines, whether it's universal credit. And we've got to be realistic. Are we prepared as a council for that? And how will that change the dynamics? I know it's a guessing game at the moment, but I just want to make sure that we as a council are prepared for something like that.
I mean, the Education Improvement Board, I think, is going to be a good step forwards. So, you know, how prepared we are if we find that the numbers of disadvantage or the pupils in receipt of the pupil premium percentage is increasing. So if it's not 1 in 4, if it starts to be 1 in 3 or 1 in 2, then clearly the emphasis of all our support services, and not just on for academic outcomes, of course, but for all sorts of outcomes as well, the pastoral side and so on, needs to be, will naturally be, but also should be further focused towards this group. And I think the Education Improvement Board in particular, having a key focus in this as one of their key drivers in performance and what they're trying to do, will shine the light further into this area.
That's fine. I think Cass trying to get in there, Chair, but can I just ask you, are we prepared? Have we got the comms ready? Sorry, going on comms again, but these people are not aware, a lot of them, and people, one person in particular has got a house which is worth 300, maybe 400,000 pounds, and is now looking as if may well be looking for support from the government in different ways there. Have we got it right to get across to these people that there is support available for their children?
I think, David, I'm quite happy to take that. I think we are trying to ensure that the messages are continuously focused on providing people with access to the right advice. Our Communities Hub is going to continue. We're not disbanding our Communities Hub. We made the decision that we would keep that, and within that we've got advice and guidance around what people might be entitled to and how they can get help and assistance where they need to. But through our Facebook pages, our comms strategies, we are constantly and continuously trying to ensure that the messages are out in communities. But if there is anything, Gordon, that you think that any of your constituents need assistance with, then obviously send them our way.
That's fine. It wasn't criticism. It was just practicalities of people who aren't aware.
Yeah.
And linking in, which I do with the Citizens Advice and other groups such as that in various towns across Tyndale. Thank you for the read.
Sorry, we just to say particularly during the first wave of this pandemic, we were concerned about those people who would become eligible for free school meals. As part of that, and we did a little bit of comms around making sure that people knew how to access access the process for getting free school meals, because obviously that was a huge concern for us.
And just to add to that, I think our comms team do a magnificent job to constantly update the NCC website and information on there repeatedly with everything that they can for people to link up to. So well done to them. Any more questions from the committee? Scott?
Yeah, just follows along from Gordon a little bit, actually. So given that the government's job retention scheme's coming to an end, and if I just pick out Blythe Valley, for instance, as a potential 5,500 job loss in relation to that, a lot of people are going to come online for some of the criteria that might not have been in the criteria before, which David referenced, some of the free school meals and such like. I'm just wondering, David, from a financial point of view, does the pupil premium money reflect instantly, or would it be in the following financial year? So would there be updates throughout the year as people came online? Would be the first question. The second question is around the North of Tyne strategy. So obviously we have, I'm assuming we still have responsibility for some of that from a cabinet member point of view. The previous cabinet member was very, very clear around the strategy and the position of the council, and his desire to see what that was delivered. I'm just probably a question for Guy really around the North of Tyne strategy as it is. What has his influence been in the last couple of weeks, and what's his plan around that? Because it's a very broad statement to kind of support that recommendation without hearing whether the new cabinet member has a different view from the old cabinet member. It's a bit of, you know what I mean? Thanks very much, Chair.
Scott, if you just want me to come in on the financial aspect of it, the finances and the payment of the pupil premium is related to school census, so that's at limited times in the year, and the funding will follow into the school budget the following year. So actually, there is a delay in that. Now, it is a tricky one.
Delay with such a large influx.
Yeah. I mean, it's I suppose there's a job probably for us to do as a central team to support governors to recognise that the money is coming, and actually, bizarrely, obviously, sometimes the money arrives almost, but for a child who's moved on to the next setting, they've moved on, So in amongst school finance, we need to be acutely aware, I suppose, if there is a particular impact on a particular school, that actually we might be able to be more reasonable with maybe an end of year deficit, because they're actually spending money which will come to them in the following academic year, and therefore it's not as big an issue as if that they just spent and there was nothing to cover that in future years. So we do look and support schools if they do go into deficit for any reason, but the 3-year recovery plan from any deficit would clearly include the pupil premium money yet to come. It just hasn't come into their accounts yet. There is the issue also, though, that the pupil premium child that turns up the day after your census, you don't receive the funding for that. And so maybe there'll need to be some strategy around if there's another school does receive that money, but they don't have the child on their books, that actually maybe we may well need support to do that, but actually to look at the finances and say, you know what, in this particular time, maybe the pupil premium money has to follow the child immediately, as it does for SEND funding currently, but not for pupil premium.
David, can I just ask there, would the same reverse scenario happen? So when somebody no longer is eligible for that, as I say, the reverse scenario would then take place.
Yes, I mean that's mitigated really though by the fact that it's ever 6. The vast majority of children in receipt of the pupil premium is connected to free school meals, and it's actually have been in receipt of free school meals at any point in the last 6 years. So even if it was just that parents were between work for a period of time and it was a month, for the next 6 years the school would receive the pupil premium.
Okay.
And so there is a lag there, a useful lag actually in schools' benefit for once, to keep the money
Right.
coming.
Okay. Nothing. Guy, did you want to come back in on Scott's other point?
Just briefly, yeah. I mean, there's still some work to be done because the first recommendation is the drive to improve the outcomes of disadvantaged students refreshed via Northumberland or the North of Tyne pupil premium strategy. So I'm expecting some paperwork from David, I would presume, to analyse which one would be the best route to go down, and I'm sure that would come back to this committee.
Thank you. Is that okay for you there, Scott?
Yes, Chair, fine. I'm just conscious that phone number's still on. Did we ever work out who it was?
It went off and come back on. I did send a message through. We do have a member who's not shown on video.
I think we did identify who it was. I sent a message to Chris, and I think he has identified who it was.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Mark,
yes.
right. It's actually John Sanderson from the National Education Union.
That's who I thought it was, John, because you weren't on video, so I sort of narrowed it down.
I couldn't get on the video, it's not letting me on, so I came onto the phone and you couldn't hear me, so I had to click off the phone to find out which buttons to press so you could hear me, and now you can hear me.
I can, John, thank you. John, have you had anything to question on this item?
I didn't. I had a couple of questions early on other items, but I wasn't sure which buttons to press. But not to worry.
Right. Sorry about that.
My only concern is a general one, and it's kind of a philosophical one. In that gaps are not closing nationally, gaps are not closing locally. The spending obviously goes into schools in a variety of formats, and you know we've had Alan asked a question about best practice. I wonder if we're asking the wrong question. If we're, is it possible to close the gap at this point, or are we benchmarking at the wrong times? For instance, if you've got a student who is not going to reach a certain level by age 10 or age 14 or age 16, should we be benchmarking that student at an older age? Because very often students, when they go on to further education, actually catch up academically. And I wonder if there was any kind of, I suspect there's not because of the funding, if there's any kind of survey that could be done as to whether the students who have a deficit early on because of deprivation actually catch up at some stage if there's with the provision of further tuition later on. And I've lost you completely there.
Yeah, the school improvement central team have exactly those conversations on an individual basis with schools about individual schools within the school. So anybody that's in the vast majority of all the maintained schools and about half the academies do purchase the school improvement service level agreement, and within that. Those types of questions are the specific questions within each school that the SIPs, the school improvement partners, are asking, and so and also feeding back. So some of the I mentioned before the network meeting for pupil premium. The guests and speakers to those are often found through SIP visits to the schools. So that's how we actually identify where the best practice is. But in terms of the individuals, it is. Different. I've picked some very high level academic measures for simplicity's sake, really, just to try and be clear. But actually, again, there will be many areas where the pupil premium is being appropriately spent in terms of supporting catch up, but because of maybe some SEND reasons, that child won't actually make the key standard measure. But actually, for that child, they are making good progress within their school. And that is they ratified via the SIP. The school needs to justify that, and then that goes on to be reported, hopefully, to governors in a meaningful way.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, David.
No problem. Thank you. Any more questions on that item? Are we okay to agree the 4 recommendations as outlined previously? We agree those? Thank you, and thank you for that, David. So we'll move on to item 7, report of the Scrutiny Officer.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a copy of the work programme. The next meeting will be on the 1st of October. It's a slightly tight turnaround. The Education Improvement Board report that was scheduled to come for the 1st of October would probably come either in November or December now. David might be able to add to this, but I don't think the board has managed to meet much throughout COVID, so there isn't a great deal to update the committee on, so that'll come a little bit later.
Can I just clarify that, Chris, just to be very clear, that it was due to launch in February of this year, but unfortunately due to the build-up of the COVID crisis at that point in time, we made the decision to defer it for a little while, and now David has taken over the responsibility for that, so it will be starting with a vengeance in the next couple of weeks or so.
So we'll have a report from the committee a bit later on that. So yeah, it's the work programme outlines what we have planned for October and November, and as always, if members have anything they want the committee to look at, they can always reach out to me or to the chair, and we'll discuss and consider how we can take things forward.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chris. I have no items of urgent business, so failing that, I'll close the meeting with the next meeting being held, as mentioned, on the 1st of October. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'll see you then.
Thank you.